Dr. Marcus Williams stood frozen outside the conference room, his hands trembling as muffled voices leaked through the heavy oak door. "His technique is too radical," came the dismissive tone of Chief of Surgery Dr. Harrison. "We can't risk our reputation on experimental methods." The words hit like ice water. 3 years of research, hundreds of successful procedures, all reduced to whispered doubts about his credentials, his background, his right to innovate. Marcus pressed his palm against the cold wall, steadying himself. 24 hours later, he would walk back through those same doors. But this time, the entire medical community would be watching. This time, they would have no choice but to listen. He straightened his white coat and reached for the door handle. "What country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and if these stories inspire you, feel free to subscribe." The morning Dr. Marcus Williams first stepped into Metropolitan General Hospital, the autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and new beginnings. His footsteps echoed against polished floors that had witnessed decades of medical breakthroughs, each one carved by hands that looked nothing like his own. The weight of his stethoscope around his neck felt heavier than usual, not from its physical presence, but from the invisible burden it represented. Marcus had dreamed of this moment since childhood. Growing up in Detroit's East Side, where sirens were lullabies and hospital visits were too often the last chapter in neighborhood stories, he'd watched his grandmother succumb to complications that better surgical techniques might have prevented. Her final words still echoed in his memory. "Promise me you'll help others the way no one could help me." Now, at 34, he carried more than surgical tools in his hands. He carried the hopes of a community that rarely saw themselves reflected in the sterile corridors of prestigious medical institutions. His residency at Johns Hopkins had been marked by excellence, but also by the constant whispers that followed him. Questions about affirmative action, about whether his achievements were truly his own. Metropolitan General's cardiac surgery department was led by Dr. Robert Harrison, a man whose reputation cast long shadows through the medical world. Harrison had pioneered 3 major cardiac procedures, authored countless papers, and trained a generation of surgeons who now led departments across the country. His approval was currency in the surgical community. His disapproval could end careers before they began. The first few months passed in careful observation. Marcus watched, learned, and began to notice patterns that troubled him. The traditional approach to coronary artery bypass surgery, while successful, left many patients with extended recovery times and higher rates of complications. During late-night rounds, when the hospital hummed with quiet efficiency, Marcus began sketching modifications to the standard procedure. His innovation was subtle but revolutionary. By adjusting the angle of arterial grafts by mere degrees and modifying the suturing technique, he could reduce operative time while improving blood flow dynamics. The physics were elegant, the results promising. In simulation after simulation, his method showed superior outcomes. But when Marcus first mentioned his observations to Dr. Harrison during a routine case review, the response was as cold as the October wind rattling the hospital windows. "Dr. Williams," Harrison said without looking up from his charts, "I appreciate enthusiasm, but we've been performing these procedures successfully for decades. Perhaps focus on mastering the established techniques before attempting to reinvent them." The dismissal stung, but Marcus understood the hierarchy. He was the newest member of the team, still proving himself in a world where trust was earned drop by drop, like the careful precision required in the arterial surgery. He returned to his studies, refining his technique in private, documenting every detail with the meticulous care his grandmother had taught him to apply to everything in life. Weeks passed. Marcus continued to excel in traditional procedures, his hands steady, his decisions sound. Patients responded well to his care, and slowly some of the nursing staff began seeking his opinion on complex cases. But still, his innovation remained locked away in research notes and late-night calculations. The breakthrough came during an emergency case on a snowy February evening. Mrs. Eleanor Chen, a 67-year-old woman with multiple arterial blockages, was rushed into surgery after suffering a massive heart attack. Her condition was critical, her window for survival narrow. Dr. Harrison was attending a conference in Boston, leaving Marcus as the senior surgeon on call. As Marcus scrubbed in, his mind raced through the standard procedure. Mrs. Chen's arteries were in worse condition than the preliminary scans had shown. The traditional approach would require extensive grafting, prolonging the surgery and increasing her risk of complications. Time was bleeding away like hope from a dying heart. In that moment, standing at the threshold between conventional safety and necessary innovation, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would use his modified technique not as an experiment, but as Mrs. Chen's best chance at survival. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Marcus's modified approach allowed him to complete the bypass with fewer grafts while achieving superior arterial flow. His hands moved with practiced precision, each suture placed with the confidence born from countless hours of preparation. When Mrs. Chen's heart resumed its steady rhythm on its own, without mechanical assistance, Marcus felt a surge of vindication mixed with profound responsibility. Mrs. Chen's recovery was remarkable. Within days, she was walking the halls with energy that surprised everyone, including herself. Her post-operative complications were minimal, her pain levels significantly lower than typical bypass patients. Word began to spread through the cardiac unit about the miracle recovery. But when Dr. Harrison returned and reviewed the case, his reaction was swift and harsh. "Dr. Williams," he called during the morning briefing, his voice carrying across the conference room like a gavel. "I understand you deviated from standard procedure during the Chen operation." The room fell silent. Fellow residents and attending physicians turned their attention to Marcus, who stood with his shoulders squared, prepared for this moment. "Yes, sir. The patient's condition required nothing beyond established protocol." Harrison interrupted. "Your job is to follow procedures, not to freelance in the operating room. Mrs. Chen's positive outcome doesn't justify unauthorized modifications to proven techniques." The words hung in the air like antiseptic, sterile and stinging. Marcus felt the eyes of his colleagues, some sympathetic, others cautiously distant. In the hierarchy of medicine, challenging the established order was career suicide, regardless of results. "Dr. Harrison," Marcus said carefully, "with respect, the modifications I made are based on extensive research. The outcomes speak for themselves." Harrison's expression hardened. "The outcomes speak to luck, Dr. Williams. Medicine is not a place for experimentation without proper channels, without peer review, without institutional approval. I'm placing a formal notation in your file regarding this incident." The meeting ended with Marcus standing alone as colleagues filed out, their conversations resuming in hushed tones that didn't include him. The isolation was complete, professional exile disguised as procedural adherence. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself increasingly marginalized. His surgical assignments were reduced to routine procedures. His research proposals were buried in administrative delays. The whispered conversations that followed him now carried a different weight. Not about his credentials, but about his judgment, his reliability, his ability to function within established systems. But Mrs. Chen's recovery continued to astound everyone. Her cardiologist reported improved cardiac function beyond expectations. Her primary care physician noted energy levels she hadn't experienced in years. Most remarkably, her follow-up scans showed arterial flow patterns that exceeded normal ranges for post-bypass patients. Word of Mrs. Chen's case began reaching other hospitals through the informal networks that connected cardiac surgeons across the region. Dr. Sarah Martinez at University Medical Center had heard whispers about an innovative technique producing extraordinary results. Dr. James Wright at Children's Hospital had received calls from colleagues asking about the Williams method. The medical community was beginning to take notice, even as Metropolitan General's administration remained unmoved. Marcus continued his research in solitude, documenting every aspect of his technique with scientific rigor. He submitted his findings to medical journals, only to face lengthy review processes complicated by the controversial nature of challenging established procedures. But he persisted, driven by the memory of his grandmother's words and the evidence of Mrs. Chen's remarkable recovery. The turning point came 8 months later, during the annual American College of Cardiology conference in Chicago. Dr. Martinez had been invited to present a paper on innovative surgical techniques, and she had requested permission to discuss Marcus's method alongside her own research. Marcus wasn't initially invited to attend. Metropolitan General's budget for conference attendance was limited, and Dr. Harrison had made clear that Marcus's recent unauthorized experimentation made him a poor representative for the department. But Mrs. Chen had other plans. Having learned about the conference through her own research into her remarkable recovery, she used her connections as a retired university administrator to arrange private funding for Marcus's attendance. Her phone call to him came on a Tuesday evening as he sat in his small apartment, reviewing surgical journals and wondering if his career would ever recover from Harrison's professional embargo. "Dr. Williams," her voice was warm and determined, "I understand there's a conference where doctors will be discussing your technique, the technique that saved my life." "Mrs. Chen, No, doctor. You listen to me now. I've lived 67 years, and I know the difference between competence and brilliance. You gave me a second chance at life, and now I'm giving you a second chance at your career. You're going to Chicago." The conference hall at the Palmer House Hilton buzzed with the energy of 1,000 medical professionals sharing the latest advances in cardiac care. Marcus sat in the back row, his registration badge feeling foreign against his lapel. He hadn't told anyone from Metropolitan General about his attendance, hadn't wanted to face more questions about his extracurricular activities. Dr. Martinez's presentation was scheduled for the afternoon session on innovative surgical techniques. As she began describing case studies involving modified bypass procedures, Marcus felt his pulse quicken. She was presenting his technique, crediting him fully, but also expanding on it with her own research and applications. The Williams modification, she explained to the packed auditorium, involves a subtle but significant adjustment to traditional arterial grafting angles. Dr. Marcus Williams at Metropolitan General developed this technique, and our independent verification shows consistent improvements in patient outcomes. The room stirred with interest. Questions came from the audience about success rates, about complications, about the theoretical basis for the modifications. Dr. Martinez answered what she could, but finally turned to the microphone with a request that made Marcus's heart race. "Dr. Williams is actually here today. Perhaps he could join me on stage to discuss his innovation firsthand." A spotlight swept across the audience, finding Marcus in the back row. The walk to the stage felt endless, each step carrying him from the shadows of professional exile towards something he couldn't yet name. As he took the microphone, looking out at hundreds of cardiac surgeons, researchers, and medical device representatives, he thought of Mrs. Chen, of his grandmother, of all the patients who might benefit from techniques that challenge conventional wisdom. His presentation was quiet, methodical, and devastating in its clarity. He explained the physics behind his modifications, showed video comparisons of blood flow dynamics, presented outcome data that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. When he finished, the auditorium was silent for a moment before erupting in questions and requests for collaboration. Dr. Patricia Wells from Harvard Medical School approached him afterward. "Dr. Williams, we'd like to invite you to Boston to demonstrate your technique. Our cardiac team is very interested in implementing these modifications." Dr. Robert Kim from Mayo Clinic was equally direct. "We've been looking for solutions to exactly the problems your technique addresses. When can you visit Rochester?" By the end of the day, Marcus had received invitations from 12 major medical centers, 3 research collaboration proposals, and interest from 2 medical device companies wanting to develop instruments specifically designed for his modified technique. The flight back to Chicago felt surreal. Marcus stared out the airplane window at clouds that looked like cotton surgical gauze, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. His phone buzzed constantly with emails from colleagues he'd never met, all wanting to learn more about the Williams modification. But the real test would come Monday morning when he walked back into Metropolitan General. Dr. Harrison was waiting in his office when Marcus arrived. The older surgeon's expression was unreadable, his desk covered with printouts of news articles about the Chicago conference. The headlines were impossible to ignore. "Young Surgeon's Innovation Creates Buzz at Cardiology Conference. Metropolitan General Doctor Develops Breakthrough Technique. The Williams Modification, a new standard in cardiac surgery. Close the door, Doctor. Williams." Marcus complied, taking a seat across from Harrison's desk. The silence stretched between them like a surgical incision, precise and revealing. "I received several calls over the weekend," Harrison began slowly, "from colleagues at Harvard, Mayo, Cleveland Clinic, all asking about your technique, all wanting to know why I haven't been promoting the innovative work happening in my own department." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Harrison, who had built his reputation on innovation, was now facing questions about why he had suppressed the very type of breakthrough that had made his own career. "Dr. Harrison, let me finish." Harrison's voice was tired. "I also received a call from Dr. Eleanor Chen. She had some pointed observations about how this hospital has treated the surgeon who saved her life." Marcus remained silent, watching Harrison struggle with words that seemed foreign to his usual authoritative demeanor. "I've been practicing cardiac surgery for 32 years. Harrison continued. "I've seen countless techniques come and go. Some were genuine advances, others were dangerous fads that endangered patients. My job, as I saw it, was to protect our patients from unproven methods." He paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since the meeting began. "But I also see now that my judgment may have been influenced by factors beyond medical merit." The admission hung in the air like anesthesia, numbing in its unexpectedness. Dr. Williams, I'm recommending you for promotion to attending physician. I'm also assigning you to lead a research team to develop protocols for implementing your technique hospital-wide. And I'm personally ensuring that you receive full institutional support for your research. Marcus felt the weight of months of professional exile lifting from his shoulders. But Harrison wasn't finished. I'm also issuing a formal apology, both to you and to Mrs. Chen, for allowing personal biases to interfere with my medical judgment. Your technique is brilliant, your research is sound, and your patient outcomes speak for themselves. The older surgeon stood, extending his hand across the desk. I hope you'll consider this a new beginning for both of us. Marcus shook Harrison's hand, feeling the firm grip of respect that had been absent for so long. Dr. Harrison, I appreciate... Call me Robert. And Marcus? Harrison's smile was genuine for the first time Marcus could remember. I want to learn your technique myself. I think it's time this old dog learned some new tricks. Within 6 months, the Williams modification had been implemented at Metropolitan General with remarkable results. Cardiac surgery recovery times decreased by an average of 30%. Post-operative complications dropped to the lowest levels in the hospital's history. Patient satisfaction scores soared as people experienced faster healing and less pain. The technique spread throughout the medical community with unprecedented speed. Medical schools began teaching the Williams modification as standard curriculum. Surgical residency programs restructured their training to include Marcus's innovations. Medical journals published extensive studies confirming the superior outcomes that Marcus had documented from the beginning. But the most significant change wasn't in the operating rooms or the medical journals. It was in the conversations happening in hospital corridors across the country, where young doctors of all backgrounds began to believe that their ideas mattered, that innovation could come from unexpected places, that excellence had no color or pedigree. Dr. Marcus Williams found himself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond surgical technique. He was invited to speak at medical schools, to mentor young surgeons, to serve on committees shaping the future of cardiac care. Universities offered him research positions and department leadership roles. Medical device companies sought his input on developing next-generation surgical instruments. Through it all, he maintained his connection to Metropolitan General and to the patients who had believed in him when the medical establishment had not. Mrs. Chen became more than a success story. She became a friend, a reminder of why he had entered medicine in the first place. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years after his technique had been dismissed as too radical, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the International Symposium on Cardiac Innovation. He was delivering the keynote address titled Innovation and Inclusion: How Diverse Perspectives Advance Medical Science. 2 years ago, he began, his voice carrying to the back of the hall. I stood in a hospital corridor, holding research that could save lives, listening to colleagues dismiss it without examination. Today, that research has become the gold standard for coronary artery bypass surgery worldwide. He paused, looking out at an audience that included many of the same surgeons who had once questioned his methods. But this story isn't really about one technique or one surgeon. It's about what happens when we create space for all voices in medicine, when we judge ideas by their merit rather than their origin, when we recognize that breakthrough innovations can come from anywhere, anyone, at any time. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus thought of quieter moments, of Mrs. Chen walking hospital corridors with renewed energy, of young medical students approaching him after lectures with their own innovative ideas, of his grandmother's voice reminding him that healing was always the ultimate goal. After his presentation, as colleagues and journalists gathered around with questions and congratulations, Marcus slipped away to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Mrs. Chen? It's Marcus. I wanted to thank you again for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Her laughter was warm and familiar. Doctor, you saved my life. I just helped save your career. Besides, I told you before, I know brilliance when I see it. As Marcus hung up and prepared to rejoin the conference, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The path from dismissed innovation to accepted standard had been neither straight nor simple. It had required not just scientific rigor and surgical skill, but also courage, persistence, and the unwavering support of patients who became advocates and colleagues who became allies. The Williams modification was now taught in medical schools worldwide, had been implemented in over 3,000 hospitals, and had improved outcomes for tens of thousands of patients. But perhaps more importantly, it had opened doors for other innovations, other voices, other perspectives that might otherwise have been overlooked. Standing in that hotel lobby, Dr. Marcus Williams understood that his grandmother's promise had been fulfilled in ways she never could have imagined. He had helped others not just through his surgical skill, but by proving that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that innovation knew no boundaries, and that the future of medicine would be shaped by all the brilliant minds willing to challenge conventional wisdom in service of healing. The technique that had once been too radical was now the gold standard. The surgeon who had once been marginalized was now a leader in his field. And somewhere in Detroit, in hospitals around the world, patients were healing faster and living better because one man had refused to let his voice be silenced. The revolution in cardiac surgery had begun with a whisper in a hospital corridor. It had become a roar that echoed through every operating room where the Williams modification saved lives and restored hope. And it was only the beginning of a transformation that would reshape medicine for generations to come.